Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 3 of SuperSports, the review series for, as the name suggests, the SuperSports cars of Gran Turismo 6. These are the vehicles which are beyond your average sports car, but not quite a full-on supercar. Now in this episode we're featuring a car which is about as borderline as you can get between supersports and supercar. It is, of course, the Ferrari 430 Scuderia. Now, this is the track-biased, hardcore tuned version of the F430. The F430 already being a highly respected and very popular Ferrari in its time. And the Scuderia, when it came out, really caused a stir because it was the first internationally recognised hardcore road version of an existing super sports car. There had been some before, but not ones that really shouted about it as much as the Scuderia, and it kind of inspired other cars, and there were other cars around the same kind of time as well that perhaps weren't inspired by it but were very similar, like the Gallardo Superleggera, etc. But what does it have to offer? Because Ferraris have a good name, but sometimes some of them can be a bit challenging to drive, and obviously super sports cars in general can sometimes be challenging to drive because you've got vehicles like Maseratis, TVRs, Ferraris, Lambos. They're known for being sometimes challenging vehicles. So what does the 430 Scuderia have to offer? Well, as you'd expect, everything is a little bit further than the standard F430. It's a bit lighter, it's a bit more powerful, it's a bit quicker, it's a bit more mad, etc. But fully tuned, it produces 715 horsepower, which really is supercar territory. It also produces 442 pound-feet of torque, which isn't too surprising considering that most Italian exotic manufacturers do tend to go for power rather than torque. It redlines at 10,000 RPM, fully tuned, produces peak power at 9,500 RPM, and sits at 615 pp, which is pretty high for a super sports car. Some others are around that region, but that is quite high for a super sports car. That is in some supercars' level of territory. Now it weighs in at 1,105 kilos, so it's pretty light, not necessarily as light as you might expect, being the hardcore stripped out or semi-stripped out version of the 430, but it is still pretty light, and thanks to its reasonably low weight and high power, it has a very impressive power to weight ratio of 647 horsepower per tonne, which isn't quite as high as the Tuscan that we reviewed last time, but is considerably higher than the Alfa Romeo 8C Competizione. But what about in terms of what it actually has to offer? Well, top speed wise, it's in the 250 mph region, which is about what you'd come to expect from most Ferraris on the game. That's about the same kind of top speed that you can get from the 430 and also from the F430 based SP1 Special. All three vehicles have very similar specs, very similar performance, but different prices and obviously different looks. Now they're not exactly the same in terms of specs. The Scuderia is definitely a more hardcore version and is probably, overall I would say, the best track car of the three. Now that said, the Scuderia is not necessarily the easiest to drive of the three. I'd say the easiest to drive is probably the SP1. But the Scuderia is the most proficient on the track. It will give you the most mad lap times, and it will edge ahead of the other two versions around most tracks. Now that said, it's not an easy car to drive. Ferraris, as we said earlier, are known for being sometimes quite twitchy at high speed, and the Scuderia is twitchy at high speed. But surprisingly, it's actually twitchier at low speeds than it is at high speeds. Now I'm running a fair bit of ballast on this 430 Scuderia that I'm driving here, and also I'm not running anywhere near max power, and still it's getting the back end out around corners. Now that may not be surprising It's a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car with relatively low weight and high power. So getting the tail out isn't really surprising. But what is surprising is actually the exact opposite. At low speeds, although you do get the tail out, it's actually not the tail that makes this car difficult to drive, it's the front end. The front end is extremely twitchy at low speeds and has almost a mind of its own compared to the back end of the car. It turns in for corners but then turns in too much, the car starts weaving, and this all happens at low speeds, which is the strange thing. Usually a car is twitchier the faster you get, rather than at lower speeds, but the Scuderia is, for whatever reason, quite twitchy at low speeds. Now obviously, as I said, I'm running a ballast over the front end, and that is partially the issue, that it doesn't have enough weight grounding the front tyres. But even with ballast, it does still have that tendency to have a little bit of a unpredictable front end. But overall, as I said, it is the quickest of the three as a track car, and it will give you excellent laps on most tracks. Sheer performance isn't necessarily the quickest of SuperSports cars, but it is up there. It's one of the quickest, around 10 miles per hour quicker than the 8C Competizione, around the same kind of top speed as the Tuscan, and similar top-end performance to many of the other SuperSports cars in general. Acceleration-wise, it's very strong, and the handling, although temperamental and slightly unpredictable, is very good overall. So, it's a very good car, really, overall. But, as I said, if you are planning on buying one to use primarily as a track machine, you do need to bear in mind that it's definitely not a perfect handling car. And at 302,000 credits, it's quite a bit of money to spend if you end up not liking the car. Now, I'm not saying that it's not worth that money, certainly not. But be prepared for a challenge, because of the SuperSports cars in this series, the Scuderia is one of the most challenging. Not to drive, but to get the best out of. So that's it for this review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.